Hello there, everyone. Welcome to my review of the Mobile Suit Gundam SEED Freedom movie. For context, I watched both the sub and the dub in theaters back to back. The sub was on the 7th and the dub was on the 8th. And I watched this movie pretty much immediately after finishing SEED and SEED Destiny for the first time. Because even though I initially watched SEED years ago, I only watched maybe 15 or so episodes before dropping it because I did not like it very much and I didn't have any real reason to finish it. But with the trailers for the SEED Freedom movie releasing, I started to think I should watch the movie. It was actually the trailer with the new TM Revolution or Takanori Nishikawa song that made me decide, okay, I actually do want to watch this movie. And so that's what motivated me to finally go back and watch all of SEED and SEED Destiny. Because I did want to eventually go back and finish all of them anyway, and this was finally the excuse. And this is going to be a spoiler-filled review, and that is because I think if anybody likes SEED and SEED Destiny, or if you can at least tolerate SEED and SEED Destiny, like myself, and you have seen all of the episodes, the 100 or so episodes, you might as well just go ahead and watch the movie, right? Because if you've invested that much time into the Cosmic Era, why wouldn't you just watch the newest thing that's only 2 hours long, right? I was actually considering, after finishing SEED and SEED Destiny, I was considering making a review of both of those together, just collectively reviewing SEED and SEED Destiny together. Because when I finished SEED Destiny, I did have a few days in between then and the SEED Freedom movie coming out. I had a bit of a breather in between. And I was wondering, maybe I should make a review of this show while it's still as fresh on my mind as possible. But I decided against it. I talked myself out of it because I already said I don't like SEED and SEED Destiny very much. And so it would have been a very critical review of the show. And I wasn't sure if posting a very critical review of the show would be a good idea when people were probably feeling super nostalgic for the show with the movie about to release, right? Maybe that was not the best timing. But if you guys do want to hear my thoughts on SEED and SEED Destiny, let me know in the comments, and I might still consider doing a review of those two shows. But anyway, as for SEED Freedom, like I already said, if you've already seen SEED and SEED Destiny, just go ahead and watch it and then come back to this review. Because I do honestly think that if you like SEED or SEED Destiny even a little bit, you will find some level of enjoyment in this movie. And that is because most of the issues in this movie, or at least most of the issues that I personally have with this movie, are also things that plagued SEED and SEED Destiny. What am I talking about? I'm talking about things such as logistics being largely ignored. And by logistics, I'm referring to things such as time and space being of little to no consequence. For example, if a character wants to go somewhere or if a character needs to be somewhere, they just show up there. It doesn't really matter how far away they were or how long it would take to get there or how much fuel it would take or anything like that. Also, if something needs to be repaired, if something's broken and it needs to be repaired, it just gets repaired and it doesn't matter how long it takes. You don't ever really see in the show anybody not be able to sortie because they're waiting on something getting repaired. Pretty much everything gets repaired as soon as it needs to, and that even happens in the span of this movie with the Freedom getting destroyed. The Justice got destroyed as well. I don't understand how the Justice and the Freedom got rebuilt or repaired after it seemed kind of clear that they got destroyed in this movie. But like I said, it was like that in the show as well, because I'm pretty sure I got the impression that Shin destroyed the Freedom in Destiny, but then it came back as the Strike Freedom, and I always assumed that the Strike Freedom was the Freedom that was rebuilt with parts from the Strike or vice versa. But when this movie starts out, I don't think it's the Strike Freedom. I think it was the regular Freedom, and then the Freedom got blown up, but then it came back. Another example of time being of little to no consequence is the fact that this movie takes place about 1 year after the end of Seed Destiny. And despite it taking place only a year after the end of Seed Destiny, there is so much new technology and so many new weapons that were developed in that time frame that you just have to accept. For example, the shield thing on the ship that looks like ice, invisibility cloaking that is probably the same technology that the Blitz Gundam had, but at least in Seed, it seemed kind of unique to the Blitz Gundam, right? But now it seems to be much more of a normal thing. But what's weird is that even though the protagonist faction gets carried by this invisibility stuff super hard, the antagonist faction doesn't seem to have any of this technology, or at least they are never willing to use the invisibility cloaking at all. For some reason, only the protagonist faction ever uses it. And it is obviously super OP because, like I said, it carries them super hard in this movie, in the story of this movie. And also, somehow they are able to remote control things from the Earth all the way to the surface of the moon without insane amounts of input lag, because Kigali was remote controlling something. I don't even understand what she was remote controlling, even after watching the movie twice, because I was kind of confused the first time, and so I told myself to pay extra attention the second time I watched the movie, and I still don't even know what Kigali was remote controlling. But whatever it was that she was remote controlling, she was able to somehow seemingly use it without insane amounts of input lag, despite her remote controlling it from the surface of the Earth, right? So that is a case of not only time being of little consequence, considering that they are able to somehow have remote control stuff be that advanced, or they were able to develop that in a year's time, but also the fact that distance doesn't matter, because like I said, if you're that far away, I don't know how you would be remote controlling something with comparable input lag to just straight up piloting it. My point is that something like this is kind of world building breaking, because you would expect if people are able to remote control things to this effect, then why does anybody need to actually be inside of the cockpit of any mech, right? When you could just remote control everything. It actually reminds me of that one plot point from Gundam Wing, which is funny because I don't think Wing is very good either, even though I do personally enjoy Wing more than Seed. But anyway, still talking about the logistics or the lack of logistics, just so that way I can give as many examples that I can think of so people don't think I'm just making up critiques for no reason. The Requiem somehow got rebuilt again within the time frame of 1 year without anybody being aware of this somehow, or at least without anybody on the protagonist side being aware of this. Somehow there being a shield that Flaga was able to use to intercept Requiem. I don't know if that was something that could have been done in Seed Destiny, but they did it here. I guess it is okay, though, because it let Flaga do his thing again by body blocking a shot, making the impossible possible and all that. Another thing, this one isn't necessarily a critique, it's more of a question, really, because I could have put more thought into this, but I really didn't feel like it, especially because this movie gives you very little time to think about such things. But my question is, I would like to ask how certain mobile suits end up being where they are. For example, I don't know how Orb ended up having the Destiny Gundam in this movie, right? Things like that happen a lot in Seed and Seed Destiny as well. And like I said, it happens so fast in this movie, I don't have time to think about where it was when I last saw any particular mobile suit, right? So whenever a mobile suit appears, I pretty much just have to accept that that is where it is, even though I have a sneaking suspicion that if I were to think about it a bit more, it wouldn't make very much sense how they always ended up being exactly where they were. But if anybody knows, if anybody was better at keeping track of where the mobile suits were at any given time, I would love to know how, like I said, the Destiny ended up with Orb, for example. But like I said, pretty much all of this movie's issues are shared with the show, and that includes characters surviving things that they definitely shouldn't be able to survive. I think most people will at least agree with me on that one. Also, Kira's pretty lame. At least we have Athrun and Shin to balance him out. I always thought Athrun was a better character than Kira. And of course, once I got to see Destiny, I automatically liked Shin a lot more than Kira as well. Another thing is that similar to the villains in the show, the new villains in this movie are very underdeveloped. And I guess this movie has a bit more of an excuse than the show in having underdeveloped villains, considering it is a movie with much less screen time than a full-on show. But it is disappointing because the entire plot of this movie is predicated on this retcon of sorts involving genetic manipulation, which isn't too dissimilar from a lot of the big reveals in the show. Because whenever a big reveal happened in the show regarding genetic manipulation stuff, they would kind of just say it and then move on, and they never really fully explained anything, and it never really felt as if it mattered that much. Like, for example, when Flaga finds out that Raul de Cruzit, or however you say his name, is a clone of his father, it's supposed to be this shocking thing, but I don't know why that's supposed to really matter to anyone, right? But anyway, talking about the characters in Seed Freedom, it's not really a retcon in the sense of them changing lore. They're just retconning it in the sense that they are adding to the lore, right? By saying, actually, years ago, they developed the Destiny plan, and apparently Durandal was just somebody that was finally finishing the Destiny plan, right? It was actually conceived way before, and what you were seeing in Seed Destiny was just the final stages of it coming to fruition, right? And now in this movie, you are seeing the results of the people who actually kind of conceptualized the Destiny plan continue to try to enact it, right? And this could be really interesting, but the reason why it feels as if it's missing some potential is because even though it could definitely be more interesting, they pretty much just use this entire retcon as an excuse to force a love triangle between Kira, Lacus, and Orphe, right? Or Orphe. When I watched the sub the first time, I was thinking of his name like Orphe, and then I heard in the dubbed version that it's Orphe, but I'm just going to keep saying Orphe. Another potential result of this movie being limited in screen time is that a bunch of characters that could be used more were kind of sidelined. For example, the Desert Tiger guy, right? But again, this is shared with the show because I thought the Desert Tiger guy was super underutilized in the show as well. I also thought that Kigali got sidelined a bit in this movie, not in terms of the screen time, because she did get a decent amount of screen time considering the length of the movie, and she did have some pretty memorable scenes. But my point is that it felt as if they were underutilizing her quite a bit, because if you think about it, Kigali is the character with the most authority by far out of any of the main characters, right? Out of any of the main characters on the protagonist side, at least, because she is literally the leader of a country. And not just any country, she is the leader of a country that is very pertinent and relevant to the global politics of the world in Cosmic Era, right? So you would expect her to be very involved with the story, but she is not that involved with the story. And that is because the story in this movie is way more personal than political. And so with Kigali being a politician character, I assume that the writers had a hard time imagining how they could write in a politician character like Kigali into a story that was not very political, right? It was very personal. In fact, I initially expected that this might be a common critique of the movie, the fact that the story is super personal and not very politically deep. I at least expected that critique to come from Universal Century fans, right? Because Universal Century fans are going to be very used to politically dense stories in their Gundam. But the more I thought about it, I was starting to think, especially considering how well this movie is performing and selling or how well it sold in Japan, and I imagine it's also going to do decently okay in the West as well. The more I thought about that, the more I started to realize maybe the fact that this movie is not very politically dense, maybe that fact is actually making it more palatable for a lot of people, and maybe that's why it is so popular, right? Maybe that's why it'll end up being, well, maybe that's why it's popular right now, and maybe that's why it will continue to be popular. Because the main thesis or theme of this movie is something that I think literally anybody will be able to relate to or understand, even if they are not a particularly political person. The reason why I still think this is something that should be critiqued, though, is that when it comes to all of the other Gundam shows and movies, or at least the ones that I have seen, they are all, first and foremost, a political drama. And that is one of the main reasons why I like Gundam so much. But of course, you still have the romantic subplots happening at the same time underneath all of this political drama to complicate things and make things less predictable, right? And you usually get a pretty good balance. In most Gundam shows, I like the balance of political drama driving the majority of the plot with the romantic subplots kind of being there to throw a wrench into things, right? But in Gundam SEED Freedom's case, even though I wouldn't say this movie has more romantic soap opera elements than other Gundam media, it does feel that way. And I think it's just because the political side of the equation in this movie is so thin that in comparison, it makes the romantic elements seem to be that much bigger, right? Because if you were to look at it as a ratio, if Gundam is normally equal parts political drama and romantic stuff, in this movie's case, it is way more on the romantic side of things. So if you were to just look at it like a ratio, it would have a way bigger percentage of it being romantic stuff, right? Again, I do accept that this is probably what's making the movie so popular, coupled with the fact that SEED and SEED Destiny are already super popular, but I would be lying if I said I was perfectly content with the amount of political density in this movie. By the way, consider that point as my segue into speaking about more critiques of the movie, but ones that are not necessarily shared with the show. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. Speaking of romantic subplots, Agnes, why would you make a new character only to have them be a carbon copy of the worst character in the entire franchise, right? Because Agnes is pretty much exactly like Reccoa from Zeta Gundam, right? Betraying your entire faction just because the guy you like didn't give you attention. Didn't give you enough attention, I should say. It's hilarious. What's crazy is I see people on Twitter are actually liking Agnes, which is insane to me because I thought everybody unanimously did not like Reccoa. So I don't know why Agnes gets a pass when Reccoa doesn't. Also, Shura, why do you care if your contemporary pilots know how to fence well or not, right? Why would he equate someone's fencing ability with their ability to pilot a mobile suit when those are two completely different things, right? If I were to give the movie the benefit of the doubt, I'm thinking maybe the writers were under the impression that using beam sabers in a mobile suit gives you some kind of translatable skill into fencing in real life, right? Maybe there's some kind of overlap in the skill sets of those two things, depending on what the interface is like in a mobile suit when you are using the beam sabers, because they never really show off what the interface is like when they are doing that, at least. But even if that's the case, I can tell you as somebody that has done fencing in real life, even if there is some kind of translatable skill there, if you have never done fencing in real life, person to person, and you go against somebody that has been doing it for a while, your wrist strength will pale in comparison to the person that has experience doing fencing. So I'm surprised Shin was able to last that long, and I think that's more impressive than Shura beating him after Shura has presumably been training for a while. But anyway, on to the final two critiques. The movie gets very super robot-y near the end. For example, Locus puts those wings on the Freedom Gundam, and it just gets access to this AoE field effect that lets it pop off even harder than normal. You could add that to the list of new technology and weapons that these characters somehow developed within a year, right? But I think I actually have a pretty high tolerance for super robot-y stuff, even if it's in something that is supposed to be a real robot show. So the extra wings on the Freedom Gundam didn't really bother me very much. The one thing that was kind of pushing it for me was actually something that happened earlier, and I think that's also why I was completely accepting the wings on the Freedom Gundam, because I was still kind of reeling from this thing that happened earlier, and that is the Justice Gundam, or it was either the Justice Gundam or the Infinite Justice Gundam or some other version of the Justice. Like I said, I get really confused about which mobile suit is where, so I think it's some variation of the Justice Gundam, even though I thought it was supposed to be destroyed. But anyway, whatever kind of Justice Gundam it is, it was hiding inside of a Zegok. If I understood that correctly, it was literally hiding inside of the Zegok. They literally pulled a G Gundam, like when they had the Shining Gundam inside of the Statue of Liberty. That's what it reminded me of. I have no idea how they managed to hide, not only just fit the Justice Gundam inside of a Zegok, but to still have the Zegok be able to move around and act like a Zegok. I thought that was insane. Please let me know if other people are okay with that, because I thought that was the one thing that was kind of pushing it. But maybe that was just so that way all the super robot stuff that happens after it would be more acceptable after they showed something like that, right? And lastly, the one bit of critique that I have left that is specific to this movie, that is not shared by the show, is the Accords using their illusory power in combat only once, right? Because the only time they ever used it in combat was when they made Kira believe that somebody was Mikhail, and it baited him into over-chasing, right? Baited him into crossing a border that he wasn't supposed to cross. Maybe him disregarding the border was also a result of the Accords using their psychic power, right? And I think it's weird that that was only used once, because that was obviously really threatening, the fact that it was able to make Kira behave that differently. And even after the characters make the conclusion that the Accords probably have some kind of illusory power like that, they don't even ask Kira about it to try to confirm this idea. And Kira doesn't even talk about it or anything. And they don't really warn other people. And you can see that the Accords do try to use their mind reading ability later to varying degrees of success, right? Because you can see that the mind reading ability isn't that useful, because when they try to use it on Shin, it doesn't work because Shin's not even really thinking. And they try to use it on Atherin, and all he has to do is think lewd thoughts, and it throws them off their game. But you would expect the illusory power, the power to actually project things into other people's minds instead of reading their minds, would still continue to be super useful after they use it on Kira. But they seemingly don't ever attempt to use it again. So I wonder if maybe it's just not as powerful once people are aware of it, right? Because maybe once they're aware that the Accords can do something like this, they're more mentally guarded and it just doesn't work as much. That's the explanation I have to tell myself in order to make sense of things. Although I should note that Locus's auto-infatuation with Orphe, or Orphe, that might have been Orphe's deliberate psychic influence rather than some kind of innate genetic inclination that Locus has. Because when I first saw this movie, when I first saw this scene, the first time I saw this movie, and Orphe was able to somehow immediately put her under his spell and bewitch her, I was thinking, oh no, is he pulling a Sirocco, right? Please don't be another Sirocco. Fortunately, it wasn't a Sirocco thing, even though little did I know at this time that Agnes was going to let herself be Sirocco'd by Shura. But anyway, obviously they reveal that, Locus was specifically genetically designed to be the perfect genetic match for Orphe, right? And vice versa. And that's why they're able to somehow instinctually tell that they would be perfect for each other. And I assumed that's why she was feeling that way. But then the second time I watched the movie, knowing everything that was about to happen, I started thinking more, and just paying attention to the way things were being depicted. And I was getting the sense that, okay, even if they are both able to somehow instinctually tell that the other person is their perfect genetic match as a partner, as a romantic partner, it still seems weirdly one-sided on Locus's side, right? Because when Locus sees Orphe, it's as if she's getting hypnotized, right? And that might be the case with Orphe, but it never really showed her that way from Orphe's perspective, right? He was more so just obsessed with her, and it was honestly a little bit of cognitive dissonance, right? Because they even made it a point that he's not really even in love with her. It's more so that his entire life he's been groomed with the belief that he's doing all of this for a single purpose and that this is why he exists, and that when he meets Locus, he has to marry her because otherwise his life would have no meaning, right? So they did make it a pretty good point that Orphe wasn't actually in love with her, but it was more of a cognitive dissonance thing, right? And when it shows from Locus's perspective, her being bewitched by Orphe, that's not the same type of thing, right? And I think that if Locus being weirdly hypnotized and infatuated by Orphe like that was due to a genetic inclination, I think they would both have that, right? But as I just said, it does not seem as if Orphe has that. So I think that's actual evidence to assume that Orphe was actually trying to deliberately use his psychic powers in order to hypnotize her to make everything more smooth, right? So this is all to say that even though I believe the Accord's power to influence other people is used more than once in the movie, I still think it's weird that using them in combat was only used once, right? In order to mislead Kira. But again, maybe it's more of a surprise attack type thing in that it's way more useful on somebody that is unsuspecting of it existing, right? Okay, actually, I have one more critique. I know the last critique I said lastly, and before that I said two more things, but it was actually three more things. But I think that me forgetting this one actually helps corroborate my point. And that is I forgot their names. I forgot the characters' names, but it's two of the three Black Tri-Star type characters dying. I know they're not even called Black Tri-Stars, but they show up in SEED Destiny with the Doms, so they're obviously an homage to the Black Tri-Stars from Universal Century. Two of those three died in this movie, and the reason why I don't like it is because, first of all, whenever you get a movie sequel to a show, I hate it when you bring back these characters for a movie sequel in any kind of movie sequel to a show. I hate it when you bring back characters from a show into a movie just to kill them off, right? Because if you're just going to bring characters back to kill them off for the final little movie segment, which is supposed to be a bow on the entire experience, it just feels so lame. And whenever that happens, it makes me wish they just didn't make the movie, right? Because I would prefer them to just not make a movie sequel if it means they're just going to kill off some of the characters that I like, right? Because so long as there isn't a movie sequel, it means everybody that's alive at the end of the show in my headcanon can stay alive, right? But the fact that they died in this movie, even though they aren't, any particularly relevant characters, it still bothers me for the same reason. And also, it kind of bothers me because what makes it more annoying is that I get the sense that the writers were definitely aware of what I'm talking about. I think they also are not fond of just bringing back characters in a movie sequel to kill them off. And I think that's why they killed these two guys off, because they weren't very relevant at all. They weren't particularly relevant or anything like that. So it feels kind of like a cheap checklist death. I get the sense that they didn't want to kill anybody off on the protagonist side, but maybe they started doubting themselves when they saw that not a single person dies on the protagonist side in some version of the script. And so maybe they went back and decided, well, somebody has to die, right? It would be weird if nobody on the protagonist side dies. So then they probably just looked at the bottom two characters on a list of relevance and just axed them. And that's what makes it feel kind of cheap. And I already said that this movie gets really super robot-y near the end and pretty self-indulgent near the end. And so I think with it being like that, I would not have thought it unrealistic, or I wouldn't have thought it any more unrealistic if they just literally didn't have anybody on the protagonist side die. So I really do think they should have just been overly optimistic about this and had nobody die on the protagonist side at all, because I'm sure there were some people out there that really liked the whole Black TriStar group that were pretty upset that they waited 18 years for a movie just to kill them off, right? The one potential good reason they had for killing these two characters off is that it gave the one surviving Black TriStar member a little bit more of a revenge subplot. So I guess they sacrificed two to make one of them a little bit more interesting. But she doesn't really talk about this whole revenge quest until she finally gets revenge on the person that killed her two teammates. And up until that point, you couldn't really tell that she's torn up about her teammates dying, because she doesn't ever talk about wanting to get revenge or anything like that, and she doesn't ever look particularly upset either. Maybe they were just trying to make it seem as if she is more battle-hardened than most of the main characters, considering most of the main characters in SEED are pretty young, right? But I still think it's kind of lame. Okay, finally, that concludes my list of problems with the movie, which might sound like a lot of complaining to some people. But again, keep in mind, I'm not a big fan of SEED or SEED Destiny in the first place, and most of those critiques about this movie, like I said, are shared with the show. So my point is that if you liked the show, or at least could tolerate these issues that were in the show, and you think these don't sound like a big deal, then I really do think that you are going to enjoy the movie, because I enjoyed the movie a lot, even with me not being a big SEED or SEED Destiny fan. So I can only imagine how much a hardcore SEED fan enjoyed the movie, because there is a lot to enjoy. So I can finally talk about the things I like now. I just wanted to make sure that I included the more critical parts of my review in the first half of the video, because said critical parts, I think, are probably going to sound a lot more unique, whereas my positive comments about the movie are probably going to sound very similar to what everybody else is saying positively about the movie. And also, I kind of wanted to do it considering the peak end rule. I wanted to make sure I ended the video on a high note, because again, I was already kind of scared of SEED fans. That's why I didn't post a critical review of SEED and SEED Destiny a mere few days before this movie came out. So I would rather put the high notes at the end so they don't bully me too much in the comments, because I know that picking on SEED fans is picking on a lot of people. But even I have to admit that the animation and cinematography in this movie was really good. Obviously, much better than SEED and SEED Destiny, because SEED and SEED Destiny were made in the early 2000s, and it does not look good at all, and it suffers from so much recycled footage, right? But in this case, not only is the animation way, way better, but the cinematography is way better as well. And it's just very, very exciting to watch. Also, I don't know if Hirai's style actually developed over time, or if it's just that the animation finally caught up to what he was imagining back then. But the Hirai designed characters look so much better now, and not just because of the animation, but because of how they're actually drawn. For example, characters actually have lips now. It's obviously a lot more noticeable on the girl characters, but even the male characters, you can tell that they have lips now, and it makes them look so much more appealing. The one critique I have, I know I'm talking about positive stuff now, but I just remembered this. The one critique I have about the visuals is that some of the ship shots, when they show the ships in CG, I noticed there was some jagged aliasing on them, but I was kind of debating on whether or not I should mention this, because I remembered that watching Doan's Island in the same theater, I noticed the same thing. In Doan's Island, I noticed that there was some jagged aliasing on some things. And so even in that review, I was speculating maybe it's not how the movie looks. Maybe it's just because I'm sitting close to the screen, right? And so I'm not really holding that against this movie, but I wanted to point it out because I've noticed it twice in a row. So it could potentially be a movie theater thing, but it could also potentially be something with Sunrise. Also, I might have caught a continuity error. But regardless, I think the animation and cinematography are enough of a reason by themselves to merit watching this movie. As for the mobile suits are CG, but they don't look bad either. They don't look as good as the CG mobile suits from The Origin or Doan's Island, because the CG mobile suits in The Origin and Doan's Island seem to be a bit more stylized, whereas the CG mobile suits in Seed Freedom seem to be a bit more akin to the CG mobile suits that were in Gundam Unicorn or Gundam Hathaway, right? So they're not very stylized looking, but I never had an issue with it because it's very consistent throughout the movie. I much prefer CG mobile suits if they stay consistent instead of it constantly flipping between 2D and CG in a jarring manner, right? As for the music, I kind of already alluded to this earlier in mentioning that the music from one of the trailers is what made me want to watch the movie and is what motivated me to watch all of Seed and Seed Destiny, but the music is very good, which is another thing that is consistent between this movie and the show. And I think that's honestly probably one of the big reasons why people remember Cosmic Era so fondly, because the music is a lot better than most of the other elements in the show. But I really like the new Takanori Nishikawa song, and I would actually consider it one of my favorites of his. It's probably one of my top 5 favorite TM Revolution / Takanori Nishikawa songs now. I'm also happy that they reused one of his old songs from the show for this movie, especially because it's one of the songs that I really liked and I think it fit the scene very well. In terms of the story itself, even though I did complain quite a bit about several of the story elements, I actually do think that the story overall justifies itself pretty well in terms of it being a sequel to the show. And that is because it is satisfying to see the Destiny plan actually manifested, at least to some extent, right? Because in Seed Destiny, even though Durandal is the final boss of the show who is fighting to propose this so-called Destiny plan, we never got to see what it actually would have looked like in practice, right? And they never really fully explained it very well either. My perception of the Destiny plan was that it was essentially going to result in government-assigned jobs, and everybody would be content with the jobs that they were assigned because they would have been specifically genetically bred to have an aptitude for that thing and to be fulfilled in doing said thing, right? And so the Destiny plan, assuming you have the means of manipulating genes like that, honestly sounds pretty compelling, and it does not sound like an objectively bad thing. There's a lot of merit to it, right? I'm not necessarily saying that it's what every country should do, but I'm saying that there is definitely some merit to it, and it should deserve some kind of debate, right? And I think it's so weirdly, overly cartoony in Cosmic Era that they have a war over this, because why would somebody who is proposing the Destiny plan try to force everybody to adopt it and then they don't want to do it and then they go to war to fight him, right? I think if Cosmic Era were depicted a bit more realistically, if its politics were a bit more airtight, something like the Destiny plan would get proposed and it would be the topic of debate for many years between all of these governments, and some countries would adopt it. And if some countries adopted it and it ended up working really well, other countries would follow suit and adopt it as well, right? Some countries would have to be the example to adopt the Destiny plan early to showcase and prove that it actually can work, right? So I think it's so goofy that it had to turn into a war. So I never felt satisfied at the end of Seed Destiny because we never got to see what it actually would have looked like. You don't know if it was actually justifiable to go to war over fighting against this thing, right? So it is nice to see the Destiny plan, like I said, manifested to some extent in the movie because we can finally see what Durandal was actually trying to propose. And even Kira had some self-doubt in this movie about fighting Durandal because he starts wondering if robbing the world of the Destiny plan was the right thing to do, right? So being able to at least see the first few stages of the Destiny plan in a small scale in the Foundation government makes it a lot more satisfying because you can see, okay, maybe the Destiny plan wasn't all it was cracked up to be, right? Because if Orphe was designed to solely and exclusively mate for life, essentially, with Locus, then you can assume that Ingrid was definitely not designed to want to be with Orphe, right? But she ended up liking him anyway as a secret admirer of sorts. So that goes to show that immediately upon implementation of a Destiny plan, that it is not as solid or as predictable as what Durandal was thinking, right? And that gives justification to Kira defeating Durandal, knowing that it actually wouldn't have been that great. So now neither us nor Kira has to be stuck wondering what the Destiny plan would have looked like and if it would have been way better than what we currently have, right? Another way in which this movie's story enhances its predecessors, at least to me, is the fact that the retcon about Locus being an Accord who was designed to be able to influence people by singing makes it way more acceptable to me that she was able to essentially hypnotize entire swaths of civilians in SEED and SEED Destiny, because I thought it was so ridiculous that so many people cared so much about what she had to say on political matters when she herself wasn't even particularly a politician or anything like that, right? Obviously, there's some potential influence from Macross with the pop idol in Mecha stuff, but it still annoyed me, and I had to always roll my eyes whenever it was a plot point about Locus needing to say something to people, or people thinking that Locus thought one thing with, you know, the whole mirror situation in SEED Destiny. So now you can say that all along it was because she had some kind of borderline supernatural ability to influence people with the power of song. And even though that sounds way more ridiculous, I can accept that way more easily. And I don't even normally like retcons. Some other things I want to shout out are the returning suits from Universal Century. So we knew that there would be a new Gyan design because that was in one of the trailers, right? And the new Gyan design is pretty cool, and I really like that they took one of the old goofy designs, one of the goofiest designs from the 70s. I always like it when you take a goofy design from the 70s and redesign it without being ashamed of what it was, right? Because you can tell when you look at the new design that it's definitely the Gyan still. It's still definitely recognizable, even though it has some cool new elements to it. But we did not know about the Gelgoog or the Zegok. So the new Gelgoog is piloted by Luna Maria Hawk because she piloted the Red Zaku in SEED Destiny, and it got upgraded to the Gelgoog, just like how Char piloted a Red Zaku in Universal Century and then switched to a Gelgoog. But I really like this Gelgoog in particular because of its face that reminds me of the Grappler Goof of all things. Grappler Goof from SD Gundam Force, Superior Defender Gundam Force, because Superior Defender Gundam Force was actually my introduction to Gundam. And so the designs from that show are super imprinted on my brain, and I'm super nostalgic for the designs in that show. So seeing the slashes, for lack of a better term, across the Gelgoog's face, the new Gelgoog's face, it reminded me of the one slash that Grappler Goof had in SD Gundam Force. And the Zegok, like I said, the Zegok is the other returning suit. And unlike the Gyan or the Gelgoog, it didn't really get redesigned at all. I didn't look at a side-by-side comparison of Universal Century to this new Cosmic Era Zegok. But just going by memory, looking at the Zegok, it looks pretty much exactly like the old Zegok. So it's kind of funny that they kept this one pretty much as is. But it was really cool seeing Athrun show up with the Zegok. The context in which it appeared made it really cool because Athrun already has a lot of parallels to Char from Universal Century. So seeing him show up to jump scare everybody in a red Zegok, just like how Char was running around with a red Zegok in Jaburo in Universal Century, was pretty cool. And I know that Rowley Cruzit, or however you say his name, and Reza Burl are the actual resident Char archetypes, but it's obvious that the elements of Char and the tropes relating to Char were kind of split amongst multiple characters in Cosmic Era, because for one, Luna Maria Hawk uses the red Zaku and the red Gelgoog, right? And Rowley Cruz is obviously the blonde mask-wearing Char archetype, so visually he's the most apparent one. But Athrun Zala is literally the son of the guy that was in charge of Zaft, which is supposed to parallel Zeon, and then he goes on his own little Quattro Bajina arc when he's Alex Dino, right? So that was really cool to see the Zegok piloted by Athrun like that. Shin was pretty cool in this movie as well. I already said I like both Athrun and Shin a lot more than Kira, and they get some pretty good moments in this movie. I think the one thing that's really bothering me the most with Kira is when Orphe confronts him. Orphe confronts him, and it's just those two talking, right? And Orphe literally just walks up to tell Kira, I'm going to steal your girl. I'm going to do it. What can you offer her? All you know how to do is fight. Once you achieve peace, what are you even going to be good for? Why would she want to have somebody standing around who only knows how to fight once you guys are living in peace, right? And he was at a complete loss of words, which I think is ridiculous because Orphe has only known Locus for not even a day, right? Kira and Locus just met this guy, and they don't have anything. Kira doesn't have anything to say back to that. I thought he was going to hit him with the
I would rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a battle
type quote. You know the one. I don't know if that's exactly how the quote goes, but I'm pretty sure everybody knows what I'm talking about. He could have just said something cheesy like that. You could have said, man, you don't even know us. You literally just met my fiance today and you're acting like you know what's going on here. It was so annoying. And I know Kira does want to defend his relationship with Locus, right? Because he was sticking up for himself a lot more when it came to Agnes advancing on him, right? So I don't know why he was acting like that around Agnes, but not Orphe. It seemed weirdly inconsistent. I would have expected him to be just as defensive against Orphe, right? But anyway, I don't know why I'm complaining about Kira. Again, it's way too easy for me to complain about Kira. I'm supposed to be talking about the things I liked about the movie in this segment. So, Athrun and Shin, they get some pretty good screen time. Luna Maria is pretty cool too. Even her sister Mayrin, even though she doesn't get very much screen time, she kind of slays for the little bit of screen time she has. And the funny parts in the movie were actually funny. I was kind of surprised to actually find myself thinking that parts were funny because I don't usually associate humor with Gundam. And this movie has a surprisingly high amount of comedic moments for it being a Gundam thing in the span of only 2 hours. But all of the funny parts felt really well deserved, and none of them felt out of place. And the important thing is that none of the funny parts were at the detriment of the significance or the severity of any of the scenes or anything like that. And it was also pretty awesome seeing Izak and Dirka show up to help out near the end as well, because those two were some of my favorite characters in SEED Part 1. But then in SEED Destiny, it felt as if the writers just didn't know how to use them anymore, right? They didn't really do anything in SEED Destiny. And it also felt as if they got demoted in a way because they had to just use mass-produced mobile suits in SEED Destiny. And I imagine from their perspective, it must feel pretty lame having to use mass-produced mobile suits after they got to use the Dual Gundam and the Buster Gundam from SEED Part 1, right? So not only was it awesome seeing them show up to actually have a role in this movie, but it was also seeing them back in the Dual Gundam and the Buster Gundam, considering they had not been in those suits since SEED Part 1, seeing them back in the suits that they kind of got attached to and that the audience got attached to seeing them in all the way back in SEED Part 1. So that was pretty cool. Comparing the vocal performances between the subbed version and the dubbed version, which is something I can do considering I watched both versions of the movie, I would say both of them are pretty good and neither one is necessarily better than the other. So I would just recommend watching whichever one you typically prefer, right? Because in my case, I watched all of Seed and Seed Destiny in the Japanese voices because I watched the subbed version of the show. And so in my case, I prefer the subbed version of the movie just because those are the voices I am used to. But like I said, the English version is very good as well, even though Atherin's voice definitely shocked me because I was not expecting it to be that deep. But I'm sure that if you already saw Seed and Seed Destiny in English and you were already used to that kind of voice, it won't shock you so much in the movie, assuming he still has a consistent voice between the movie and the show. And in terms of standout performances, if I had to pick only one, I would say my favorite is Orphe's English voice, because I thought that was surprisingly really good voice acting, especially considering I did not recognize the voice actor's name. I've probably heard him in other things before, but in terms of my actual familiarity with the person, I did not recognize his name like a lot of the other more popular voice actors. So I wonder if we'll start seeing him in more projects with big roles from now on, considering Orphe was a pretty big role in this movie, right? And I think he nailed it. But as I've been saying, this movie is very on brand with the rest of the Seed franchise in the sense that it shares pretty much all of its low notes, but also it shares its high notes as well. In fact, I would say this movie makes those high notes even higher. So let me know what you guys thought about the movie. Personally, I thought this was more of a popcorn flick type movie than something like Gundam Hathaway. I'm super looking forward to Hathaway Part 2 and Part 3, and I kind of went into this movie treating it as sort of an appetizer for Hathaway Part 2 and Part 3. And thinking of it like that, I did enjoy this movie quite a bit, and I had a lot of fun watching it in theaters because before this movie, the only time I had actually seen a Gundam movie in theaters was Doan's Island. And when I watched Doan's Island with my brother, the only other people in the theater was just one guy and his kid who were sitting way in the back. So it basically felt as if I watched it with just myself and my brother, right? But in this case, with Gundam Seed Freedom, both days, the theater had quite a bit of people in it. So I think even though it's not technically my first theater Gundam experience, in a way, it felt as if this was my first full-on Gundam theater experience. Not in the sense of just seeing it on the big screen, but also being able to hear other people's reactions at the same time. So I would also love to hear you guys' reactions to the movie as well. Please let me know if I missed anything, because like I said earlier, it was just happening at such a breakneck speed that I didn't even have time to think about where the mobile suits were and if it made sense with them being where it was showing them being, right? So let me know in the comments section. And with all that said, I will see you guys later. So bye for now.